William Shatner, the 90-year-old actor, has finally gone where he has never gone before. Despite what his alter ego, Captain Kirk, on the TV show Star Trek looked like he was doing, the actor has, in the past few weeks, set a record for being the oldest person to fly to space. After the flight, he spoke of the moment of leaving our atmosphere and tipping over into the blackness of space, a blackness that he described as death. His overwhelming response was desperate sadness that we are seemingly hell-bent on destroying this glorious blue planet with its exquisite beauty. Shatner described the payoff of floating above the Earth as profound. He said that space travel is not something a person can understand until you're up there and you see the black darkness, the ugliness. He said, from our point of view, space is filled with mystery. But in that moment of leaving the atmosphere and tipping into the blackness of space, it's blackness and death. In this moment down here, as we look down at Earth, it is life and nurturing. That's what everyone needs to know, Shatner told reporters. In an article in the Los Angeles Times last year, it was noticed that when SpaceX Falcon Heavy rockets blast off, a plume of white smoke, hot gases shoot out of its 27 engines, creating a thrust equal to 18 Boeing 747 aircraft. And upon reaching orbit, the world's heaviest operational rocket will have burned about 400 metric tonnes of kerosene and emitted more carbon dioxide in a few minutes than the average car would in more than 200 years. That kind of shock to the atmosphere is stoking concerns about the effect that launching into orbit has on Earth, and it's about to get worse, the newspaper article said. Now, in these past few weeks, we've seen a surprising number of space trips by billionaires, haven't we? Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson seem obsessed with getting to and living on Mars. If an alien from outer space who in the last month or so had arrived on Earth from elsewhere in the galaxy was watching the news, they'd be forgiven for thinking that humans are preoccupied with the necessary preparations for our exit from this Earth. It would be understandable if that alien thought that we were planning for the demise of this planet. So how ironic that a trip to space adds to the issues that we face in the use and abuse of the physical resources of our Earth. Today in our Creation Tide series, we reflect on the physical resources we are blessed with on this life-filled, nurturing planet and how we use and preserve them. And whilst we can, point the finger at others who are doing a much more damaging thing to the environment than we ourselves, ruining the environment, we're not thinking today about what other people should do, but we will ask the question, what can one person do? What can you or I do to ensure that we are caring for the Earth and the resources therein? And specifically, what's our framework for thinking about this? The starting point today is again the beautiful poetry of the creation story in Genesis 1, which sees God's creating work on day 6 in the creation of people, male and female, made in his image. God provides food for all the creatures he has made, and finishing his good work, God rests on the 7th day. That provides a framework from which we ask questions. We hark back to the beginning, not just because we call this season in the church calendar Creation Tide, but because whose we are and whose world this is and who provides the resources is answered therein. So we begin by naming ourselves as gods, made in his image, and naming this world as his. We begin by acknowledging his provision for us in this good world. In 1 John 1, we hear John start at the beginning too. Just as John begins his gospel by laying out the foundation that Jesus is fully God, creator, source of life and the light that shines in the darkness, here John writes a complimentary paragraph about the work of that same Logos, the Word made flesh. John expands what that meant for those who saw Jesus, spoke with him, heard his voice, could touch him. Jesus says from verse 1, what was from the beginning, what we have seen, what we have heard, what we have looked at and touched with our hands. From verse 3, what we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you. John refers to the whole sweep of Jesus in these verses, the person, the teaching, the miracles, the death and resurrection, the ascension. God walked with humanity. God talked with humanity. And anyone who heard, saw and touched this reality could never make it less than pivotal. Here we have the declaration of what was from the beginning. John says, seen with our own eyes, touched with our own hands, this word of life revealed to us, and now through us to you, this eternal life that was with the Father, that shone a light in the darkness of separation from God, so that we could see how fellowship with our Father and his Son and with each other worked. John is stressing the centrality of Christ and that unity, that intimate fellowship in the community of Christ, and it can only flourish and thrive when we are unified as to who Jesus is. Now, nothing here is abstract. It's the reality of Jesus' personhood. This word of life is the creative expression of God. The physical, tactile, sensory reality of God walking among us, demonstrating God's own heart, showing God's priorities, revealing the very nature of God himself. It is the deep engagement with what God declared good in Genesis, engagement and involvement with the world he loved so much that he would send his only Son. So if we were to ask at this point, what can one person do? We can say that one man, Jesus, died, rose, ascended to heaven to restore us to fellowship with our Heavenly Father and gave us eternal life. The aim of John's letter is that those who read it have fellowship with their Heavenly Father and his Son, Jesus Christ, and along with that we have fellowship with one another who know eternal life through Jesus Christ. Here is a second answer to our question about what one person can do. We each can have fellowship with God and with others. You see that suddenly we are not lots of one persons, but a whole group of people knit together as those who follow Christ. We follow the same God who lived on this earth, was physically involved, who could be seen, heard and touched, who shared in fellowship with us. This picture of Christian community, based in the vertical and the horizontal relationships we share, is the context in which we do this life, in which we do eternal life. So what one person can do becomes a better question if we ask, how do I show my fellowship with my Heavenly Father and his Son, Jesus Christ? Well, obviously, we do that with the support, prayer and love of those we are in fellowship with as brothers and sisters. Our question is answered through the way that we go about our daily work, as though we work for Christ. It's obvious in the way that we share our home lives with family and friends, as those who are God's own children. And it's clear through our engagement in our communities, through the way that we live on the earth, the world that was beautifully made, because we do that from the perspective of our collectively belonging to the Creator God's family. So what we do declares the intrinsic value of what God has made. Back through church history, there have been Christian communities who have sought to remove themselves from physicality. Our physical life is so important to God that God, emptied himself as we read in Philippians, to get into life physically. The Christ who died and rose again was physically here, fully man and fully God. This world matters very much. Our fellowship principle can impact our approach to care and management of the resources we are blessed with in this world. Wherever you sit on the political spectrum, there are voices calling for sensible management of what we are blessed with in our own community and country. Whether you listen to John Anderson, former Deputy Prime Minister and former leader of the Nationals, himself a farmer who strongly advocates for a swift move to soil carbon sequestration, or our local member here in the city and leader of the Greens, Adam Bandt, arguing for the major parties to take seriously the input from leading Australian climate scientists, or the Labor Environment Action Network, a broad-based group of ALP members who are committed to supporting strong action on climate change. There are people all across Australia and the world who are keen to agitate for changes to benefit the planet. The fellowship model, whereby we encourage one another formally and informally, is not just limited to our church life. If you feel yourself asking, what can I do to change the approach of those stripping bare the Amazon, polluting the area and leaving the Indigenous populations without the natural resources they need to live, or what can I do to ensure wealthy and powerful companies are not mining resources purely for their own profit and not for some common benefit? Or how can I advocate and care for those who are impacted by changes that are occurring to our industries and workforce? Or what can I do to raise a grassroots swell toward renewable energy development? Or what can I do to recycle efficiently and effectively through our local government authorities? You are not asking any of those questions on your own. Laying the foundation for growth, building for our community's benefit, and taking responsibility for our common life are all part of engaging with this good world in ensuring that all are provided for. But of course, our starting point for our fellowship is here with each other. At the recent synod, the Dean moved a motion that would involve all of our diocese taking seriously our contribution to the climate crisis. Unfortunately, it was not passed because it would have required spending that was not already earmarked in our budget. But of course, now this idea is implanted in all our heads, and I don't doubt that there will be work in the coming year to make allowance for this important work in the budget. The offshoot of this is that those of us who are engaged with other synod members via WhatsApp or phone message groups started talking about what might actually be involved and how each of us would in fact put this into practice in our contexts, and what we were already doing. And I was asked, what are you doing at the cathedral, Heather? So I mentioned this sermon series. I mentioned our commitments to include climate-aware language and intentions in our ministry and mission goals, for it to shape our future planning for our buildings and for our site. And I hope you don't all mind, but I did actually volunteer us all to come up with paradigms and ideas that the cathedral can share with others in our diocese, so within our fellowship we model honouring the good world that we have been provided by our glorious God. Much better than heading off into space to a place that is darkness and death. We are invited to engage positively with the preservation and the flourishing of this world. We write these things so that our joy may be complete, John writes in verse 4. There is godly joy to be had here, friends, and you and I are invited through sharing in fellowship with our Heavenly Father and with each of us as our brothers and sisters to hear, see, touch, and declare the eternal life that has been revealed to us through Jesus Christ.